told me I'm a burnout, told me I'm an outcast. Now that it's my turn, y'all gon' learn and get outclassed. All I do is work, I'ma smirk when your clout pass. Be about as long as that perk in your mouth lasts. Homie, y'all should face facts, y'all stick a straw in a haystack. Just another cog that revolve for a playback. Y'all do not evolve, I'm a god to you cavemen.
Hi, I'm Marcus Pulis, and this is Voluntary Visions. I'm going to be discussing a forgotten freedom fighter today, John Locke. This is called Kindling the Fires of Freedom. If you think that the man that I have pictured in this video is the long-lost member of Aerosmith, you're wrong. This great man is an inspiration for most of the political ideas today. His name was John Locke. It was his thoughts that helped directly found the concept of self-governance and many theories that led to the founding of the United States. His ideas would inspire millions to consider the fact that they own themselves and should be directly involved in the running of their political system. His philosophy was an important step on the road from monarchy to republican government. Today, we can still learn from him as we pave the steps from a centralized republican system to one based on local voluntary community. John Locke was born August 29, 1632 in Somerset, England. He was sent to school in London at popular Westminster School. Later, he would be admitted to Christ Church, Oxford, when just 20 years old. There, he showed his first signs of rebellious thought when he chose to spend his time reading the works of Descartes, as opposed to the endorsed curriculum of the classical writers. Nonetheless, he went on to receive both a bachelor's and master's degree in medicine. His name would have been known just through his works in medicine alone. He caught the attention of Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper, 1st Earl of Shaftesbury, who made him his personal physician. Locke was instrumental in saving him when a liver infection became life-threatening. Through his connection with Shaftesbury, Locke became politically active. This would be where Locke began his radical departure from the popular models of government. He envisioned the world as it is, with good and bad competing. He realized that the governance of the time, which was largely monarchy, was not in keeping with nature. It was nature that inspired him in his theories. He observed that there were no direct reasons that any one person should lord over any other person. In nature, sure, there are alpha males, but they do not get their positions based on birth or some expectation of status. There was competition for leadership based on who was best suited for the job. He also observed that in many cases, it was cooperation between many individuals that caused an animal community to flourish. He began writing his 2 treatises on government. It has been stated that this is not a modern study on government. Evolution does not happen in a day, and this was the 1600s. That being said, it is a wonderful example of forward thinking that caught much of the world off guard. It outright challenged the divine right of kings. I find that many old writers are boring. They tend to get bogged down in the minutiae or are too stuffy for my modern tastes. This certainly is not true of John Locke. Many of these supporters of the rule of king use the Bible to support their claims. Systematically, he attacks those supporters of monarchy. Locke, being well versed in Scripture, he shows without any reasonable doubt that there is no good defense for the divine right of kings that can be found in the pages of the Bible. Locke would not end his thoughts on government by attacking monarchy alone. Quote, "'Tis a mistake to think this fault, tyranny, is proper only to monarchies. Only other forms of government are liable to it, as well as that. For wherever the power that is put in any hands for the government of the people and the preservations of their properties is applied to other ends and made use of to impoverish, harass, or subdue them to arbitrary and irregular commands of those that have it, there is presently becomes tyranny, whether those that thus use it are one or many. Obviously, he was a freedom fighter on the pages of his books hundreds of years ago. His largest contributions to the freedom movement were his theories on law and his understanding of how society functions. First and foremost, Locke's theories on law come from the view that there are two kinds of law. These are natural law, which he says needs no explanation and are self-evident. These natural laws are things like don't kill people or take their stuff. Judge Andrew Napolitano, who is massively influenced by Locke, gives a good list of these rights in his book, It's Dangerous to Be Right when the Government is Wrong. Quote, our basic human liberties, thought, speech, press, worship, travel, privacy, association, self-defense, bodily integrity, dominion over ownership of property, fairness from government, and the presumption of liberty at all times, under all circumstances, and in all conflicts, are the essence of humanity. End quote. You should note that many of these rights were included in the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Again, this is more proof of Locke's influence. The other kind of law that Locke writes about is civil law. He defines these as laws that a community agree on. He further comments that for any civil law to be valid, it must pass two criteria. First, it must be agreed upon by the community. That means that no president, king, or potentate can go against the will of the people. He also makes it clear that this is not just through some body of men who were elected deciding for us, but by the people themselves. This can be shown in the beautiful quote about government's power over property. Quote, men, being by nature all free, equal, and independent, no one can be put out of his estate, and subjected to the political power of another without his own consent, which is done by agreeing with other men, to join and unite into a community for their comfortable, safe, and peaceable living and secure enjoyment of their properties. The other criteria for civil law to be just is that everyone must be made aware of it. He asks, how can a man be expected to follow a law that he does not know? And furthermore, how can he be punished for the offense? In my opinion, a good example in modern society of a sound civil law, based on Locke's philosophy, is speed limits. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying we should have speed limits, but that they fit this definition. We as a community can decide if a speed limit is too high or too low and petition our local government for change. We should be able to argue for its removal as well, but that is for another post. The signs are also posted, making it clear of the law. You should be asking yourself about the many laws that do not fit this model. Tax alone would have had Locke beside himself. Although, were he still alive today, he'd likely be wearing a taxation is theft t-shirt while he sang Sweet Emotions. Here's one of my favorite Locke quotes concerning law. Quote, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. End quote. How society should be organized for Locke was equally as simple. This time, there are only 3 divisions. The first one is when a man is in a natural state. We're all born into this. This is the state you live in if you're not part of a community. In Locke's world, we had that choice to live with our family without the force of government invading your land or stealing your money through property taxes. The next level of society for him was a community. This is when people who are in close proximity decide to do things together. Most human interactions in society actually take place within the confines of a community. This is relevant for things like trade or common defense. Building a house or a barn together for someone would also fit this model. So would the construction of a church or a school. Anything that we decide to do together without coercion or force happens at the community level. Finally, the last level is government. This is when a community decides to have someone handle tasks for it that they don't want to do themselves. This could be as simple as someone being in charge of a militia or someone who handles all of the garbage for the community. It can also be someone who is chosen as a leader to direct the activities of that community. Locke says it makes no matter what kind of government this is. It could be a republic, a democracy, or even a monarchy. In the case of monarchy, he does specify, though, that the monarch should be chosen by the people. It is essential, he believes, that it is not automatically based upon heredity. Could it be possible that the son or daughter of a king might be the best to take over after his death? Absolutely. Locke says it is plausible, and some might argue that those who are raised by this leader will have seen examples of how to do the job. Though he concedes that it might occasionally happen, he states that in his experience, that's not going to happen. What he had witnessed was the offspring of royalty, no matter how good their parents were usually totally unsuited for the position. In the end, Locke has this to say about government. Quote, "Government has no other end but the preservation of property." End quote. Many people from both the left and right on the political spectrum have laid claim to John Locke. He said that property is derived from labor. Socialists like to compare that to many of the writings of Marx and other socialist leaders. It is clear if you read any of Locke's writings that this is entirely a misreading of his meaning. His point was in context of physical property. In his time, most land was owned by wealthy nobility, and the property might not ever have been seen by the owners. In his time, the rich owned all the land and the poor owned none. Commenting on this, he was very clear that if you own land and do something with it, like even building a fence and enjoying it for its beauty, you are using it, and it belongs to you. On the other hand, if it was unused for decades, then it should revert to what he called a natural state. It would be owned by no one until someone came along and to use the land. This seems pretty reasonable to me, but it's not the same as Marx's government ownership of land. As for the right, Locke was certainly the number one influence on practically all of the founding fathers. Many of them said so. The Declaration of Independence by Jefferson's own admission was based in Locke's philosophy. The Constitution as well has many parts that came directly from him. The Bill of Rights certainly did. In an attempt to show that they know best, those on the right have decided for themselves that all of these documents and the founders are owned by the Republicans, and they get to interpret them as they see fit. Locke falls victim to this as well. I'm not here to make a case for Locke as a voluntarist, but I do think he pointed us in that direction. It was his philosophy that led the founding fathers to challenge their far-off monarchs. Locke was nothing if not a supporter for the individual. His words on that matter could today have been spoken by people like Adam Kokesh. Words like these, quote, "All men by nature are equal, in that equal right that every man hath his natural freedom, without being subjected to the will or authority of any other man. Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions." Or this gem, quote, "Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has a right to but himself," end quote. Locke's words are timeless and relevant to the evolution unfolding in front of us. He was feared by kings and dictators all over the world. The English monarchy at one point forced Locke to flee out of the country to avoid being killed. Today, our freedom movement faces this same fear. The establishment fights us at every turn. Their propaganda and the media work hard to silence our advances. The government itself attacks us directly and covertly. Locke helped fuel what was called the, quote, Glorious Revolution, or the Revolution of 1688. This revolution led to the overthrowing of King James II of England. One of the best details of this revolution is hinted by another name it is known by, the Bloodless Revolution. Though the name is actually false, there were a few killed. It was one of the least bloody revolutions in history. This should give us hope that we can do everything Locke helped inspire and do it better. Adam Kokesh, is running for president of the United States. His platform is to dissolve the federal government in a peaceful and orderly manner. This is a natural step in the evolution of human progress, started with the inspiration of John Locke. Furthering his liberty-based ideas, Locke talks extensively about revolution. His opinion was that when a government established by the people begins to act in opposition to the interests of those same people it is supposed to serve, it is the duty of those people to withdraw support for that government. At that point, they would return to a community status. He goes on to say that if that government refuses the will of the people to reject its authority, that government has become tyrannical. Of this destruction of the state power, Locke has this to say, quote, "But there is only one thing which gathers people in seditious commotion, and that is oppression." End quote. It is time to bring this freedom fighter back into the light. Also, it is time to take his philosophy to the next step. As a free and independent people, we must unshackle ourselves from the chains of the state. Government, in all non-voluntary forms, must be thrown away to history. Our human evolution demands it. We hold the fires of liberty high in the torch of freedom, and thank all those who have come before us kindling that flame.